Well, hi, Steve. It's a real great pleasure to have you on the Mastercast, and really looking forward to learning more about your project.
Thank you, Phil. Glad to be here.
I think we're going to be talking about some interesting topics, from Machiavelli to sorting out cultural differences between Asia and Europe, and so on and so forth. But I think before we get into the topic of your master's project, it would be great for the listeners to learn a little bit more about who Steve Gaskell is.
Thank you for that, Phil. Well, if I start with the career, I've always had a passion to be a buyer. So I started my career as a graduate trainee for Debenhams on their buying scheme. Had a lot of fun there before moving to Dixon's, Toys R Us and Carphone Warehouse, all over a 12-year period. Senior buyer and commercial roles. And my last role with Carphone Warehouse was a European commercial director role. And ultimately, one of the highlights there was introducing from scratch a Far East direct sourcing model. And that's everything from understanding the factory, the components, the freight, the packaging, finance that was required. So I really felt like I'd learned my buying trade and was ready for a new challenge. So I moved into sales, where I've spent the last 15 years exec selling, 3 years for Motorola, and various sales director and general manager roles. And I had the last 12 years at Sony. Sony, I spent the first couple of years working in Munich, head of sales for Europe and for consumer electronics, specializing with my buying knowledge in distribution and retail for those big customers. And then after 4 years of being at Sony, I went on to their leadership program, where I studied for a master's in sales transformation. That was facilitated by Consalia and Middlesex University. And when I finished that course, ultimately I was promoted and was given the opportunity to manage and develop Amazon EU. And I was also given the digital platform to develop Sony's online performance and e-commerce business. And now, the last 6 months, I've been working for Consalia, where I've had the opportunity to build the e-learning and online platform, support the selling and sales funnel activity, and doing course delivery. So actually meeting students that I used to be, and teaching around and learning around the master's program and giving that knowledge that I've learned over the last few years and sharing that with the students, which is just an amazing opportunity, which I'm super enjoying. So thank you again for putting me on the show today.
Well, it's a really interesting background. I mean, we obviously don't have, that many people who've started off on the buy side who's moved into sales, but with yourself and Hillary, actually, you've both had similar backgrounds in that sense. And I think that that perspective in terms of your business career, just from the seller's side, actually sort of adds a huge amount of credibility. The fact you've been on the buy side as well as on the sales side. And of course, moving into online, which is where the digital future is going. So I think you've had some extraordinary roles, in your career, and really looking forward to hearing perhaps a little bit more about it, but more specifically around, the particular project you had in mind when you started. I must admit, Steve, when I think you go down in Consalia and the sort of folklore of Consalia as us remembering your reaction to the masters on that very first module. I don't know if you can.
Yeah, let me give you some background on that. So, yeah, I mean, when I look at the masters, I mean, as I mentioned, I've been working for Sony for 4 years. I've been heading up their distribution and retail teams, basically had European sales director roles. And just at the same timing as the masters, I was given the global role for distribution and retail and reporting into Japanese executives directly. So as you can imagine, I had a vast workload, lots of global travel, especially to Tokyo, going monthly, very busy, as we all are. And then the opportunity was presented to me to join the master's program, and I jumped at the chance. I remember immediately saying yes to the team. And I was told, just think about it for 24 hours. It's a big commitment. So I went home and I talked to my wife, and she was also super supportive and saying, you you must do this and go for it. And you look at it and you think, well, why? Well, ultimately, I say you're spending your career working flat out, working a million miles an hour. You become very good at your job, very specialist at your job. I could almost define it as a fine-tuned machine. But naturally, you're working for a decade or a couple of decades with minimum intervention. I've had training courses, leadership courses, negotiation courses, but never the opportunity to have a sustained period of training and reflection. So I jumped at the chance to do the master's program. But as I said, my first day on the master's, I actually had a business review with Tokyo at 7 o'clock in the morning. So you can imagine I was rabbit in the headlights of walking into what I felt was an alien environment, but I had all the right intentions that I just needed to get into a rhythm. And I think after module 1 or module 2, I started to get, find how I could absorb the workload, get into that work-based learning rhythm, and settle down. Yeah. So as I say, as you say in folklore Consalia history, module 1 for Steve was quite an onboarding process. And I look back and I'm super appreciating everyone who had patience to get me in the right headspace.
No, I think what we remember is you sort of asking us, well, tell me exactly what to do. Sort of break it down into how much time do I need to spend on this and that, and I think when we came back to you and say, well, it's up to you, Steve. Um, you are the center of your inquiry here.
Yeah.
This is. I think the masters is always something sort of slightly different. The way in which it's taught, the way in which people put their projects together, slightly different, perhaps, to conventional undergraduate degree programs, for example. But no, it was amazing to see how you responded to it, and actually, I think the subjects that we'll talk about with your masters was absolutely fascinating, and to see how you set the context of your topic within the context of the world you've just described, sort of new leadership, new challenges that the organization and you are facing, and exploring leadership through very particular lenses. But rather than me talk about it, I think it's probably best for you to, perhaps you could share with us the title of your master's project. Let's start with the title.
Yeah, I mean, the title, it's Navigating Leadership within Sony Mobile to create a global distribution and retail business unit. I mean, naturally, this is, a significant part of the master's program. So I wanted to always keep it a little bit flexibility in its title. If you're going to focus on, my attitude was have a win-win, a win for Sony. So keep the title something that's, going to be core for Sony's ROIs and investment, but also the same for a win for Steve in terms of, career development. So navigating leadership gives me the opportunity to research around leadership, to develop my own skills. And as I say, developing, the focus of why the business unit should transition. I say, if I look back and again, be reflective on what I've done, maybe I'd have included a word around transition as well. But it gave me the opportunity to deep dive into the business unit. And what I love about the masters is, as I said, you're working so incredibly hard in these sort of all this volume and traffic coming through the sales director as, the master of ceremonies within your business unit, without having a learning platform that actually intervenes and gives you a chance to reflect and position the scale of what you're working. How else do you get to change? And intervention is obviously bringing knowledge, bringing new ideas. And again, we were so fortunate on our master's program that it was an international program. So usually, you can imagine on these courses when you're, with your peers, you learn from everyone. But again, I was humbled to be on a course with South American team, all of, different European countries were there. So when you're recapping, reflecting, everyone's got, fantastic and different ideas and contributions. So it's great to come to the table and, they help your projects, they help your development, they help your thought process on how you want to plan your business. And as I said, that was key to me because I really felt that Sony I was very much focused on the mobile part of the business. Traditionally, we've been focusing on the network operators. They're incredibly important. The Vodafones, the EEs, the O2s, in terms of how Sony manufactures their phones to support the networks. But ultimately, my business was with distribution and retail, and that was starting to grow. And we can talk more about it later, but ultimately, the growing part of the non-network business was also starting to develop the online business, which again is a different form of selling as well that I was able to navigate and lead. And with the collaboration of this project, ultimately start to put seeds in the heads that the business needed to change and distribution and retail needed to grow.
Yeah, it's when I read your master's project, I realized, sort of quite how significant a project it was that you were working on. But I think the choice of words you have in the title, navigating leadership, the word navigating is important. It's as if you are charting a course, I suppose, within the context of Sony Mobile, as you say, a Japanese headquartered organization, but also with this creation of this, if you like, a new division, within Sony. It's very interesting to see how important, that was to Sony at the time. We've talked about the title, and I think you've talked about why this was a title that you kind of arrived at. But it would be interesting to kind of learn a bit more about, how did you start to kind of research the topic? What influenced you as you went on your journey, and how did you conduct the research that went into the project that you had? So
Yeah,
perhaps you
and
can
to
just,
say,
yeah.
there are two elements to that. To say the leadership element. So that meant I was going on a journey of core reading regarding leadership skills and how I can take my business unit, myself, my team on a journey. And again, if I look back at the start of a master's, the first thing you notice is the core reading list. Usually I read one light-hearted book per year on holiday, max relax. And now you're reading, I don't know, in the 2-year program, I probably got through 10 or 12 core reading academic and strategic books. And I know within my master's project, I actually included the quote from Harry Truman, a former US president, that not all readers are leaders, but leaders are readers. And again, this was sort of inspiring me for those golden nuggets of how I can be a change catalyst within the environment. And the first process for me, and this was all part of the modules and the master's training, is looking at doing the research on the book. So Challenger Sale, for example, allowed me to reflect on the qualities and skill sets of being a sales lead. What type of category do you fit in as a sales leader? How do you need to operate as a sales leader? So they started, as I say, I've got many golden nuggets that I started putting together in terms of how I need to operate to make things happen, which was that was key in building my business unit. Then you've got the qualitative data and the quantitative data. Quantitative was with external measures regarding GfK data and strategy analytics, showing the market movements and shifts, category planning, cracking the code, mapping out channels, and ultimately showing that there is a clear shift and data shift of investments that's needed within distribution and retail. And then the qualitative data became very important as well. So we, ultimately I set a list of, let's say about 3 internal very senior stakeholders within Sony, 3 external senior stakeholders within the customer base. And obviously you're then not just canvassing their opinion, you're gaining respect, you're gaining trust, you're developing your relationships, and you're putting together that business case that supports the data to say all of these quotes that I were getting internally and externally was showing more, that not only is the revenue and the volumes and profitability moving towards distribution and retail, but also the investments are underinvested, and this is where we need to go. And this really sparked internal conversations between the Japanese senior management of, what's the right business unit now to take advantage of this? How do we develop this catalyst within Sony on distribution and retail? How do we set up, usually it's a matrix development. Do we have solid line, dotted lines reporting in centrally? So there was a big mobilization look at how we operate. And I suppose, when I look at books again, in terms of that were triggering these sort of brain waves, as it were, and I call them golden nuggets, something like The Art of War, when you're looking at, what best describes the position of how, you put your army, where to win the battle without even fighting, which is the best way to do things, and how to mobilize the team and change the team, and look at succession planning, or, how we look at our customer engagement, or let's relook at our customer mapping, and then set up the organizational chart accordingly.
Yeah, if you are very interested in the choice of books that kind of inspired you along the way, and I know that Machiavelli was one of the books that you enjoyed reading. Yeah, talk me through what it was that you learned from reading Machiavelli. Why did you why did you want to read the book, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly, again, I had a passion to test myself, to challenge. You're on the course, so I was very keen to just make sure I had a breadth of reading. That breadth of reading became, from the classics to more biography-led in terms of leaders, you can say, like Steve Jobs, etc. Those sort of more traditional books. But so I wanted to make sure I had a good breadth of books that I was reading. Machiavelli's obviously a classic. I think I actually probably read the book twice in terms of The Prince. And again, it really influenced me in terms of, it never came across my radar before. Steve, what's your brand? How does the prince create himself? What does the prince need to do? You hear about these Machiavelli plots and what politics need to happen. Well, Steve, how do you become a brand? And again, this brand I associate to being a catalyst and a change agent within the business. How is your brand within Sony? And that was my connection with Machiavelli. And I say that was a huge moment for me in terms of how do people perceive me internally? How do people perceive me externally? What is brand Gaskell? How do I, make sure I'm in a position to support Sony moving forward? And ultimately, again, both The Art of War and Machiavelli are, huge collaboration type books in terms of how they storytell. And again, The Art of Leadership is, again, influencing collaboration and taking people on that journey. And I think that was key as a sales director. You just become very almost siloed, if you're being honest. You work super fast, you're very focused on numbers and bonus, and you're very good at your job. But ultimately, I remember at the beginning of the Masters, when I was being introduced with all our peers within the Sony group, they say, hey, here, it's Steve, he's the gladiator. And I'd give a little bit of a wry smile, on module 1 at the beginning, thinking, that's not bad to be referred to as the gladiator. They must mean I'm, closing deals and fighting and winning and this sort of storytelling. I think the Russell Crowe movie wasn't far behind, or still in that sort of, people were watching a lot, The Gladiator. But then I look back and I think that was so niche. It's exactly why I was on the Masters, to not become that sales director guy. I wanted the breadth. I wanted strategy. How did I onboard that? I call it intervention and knowledge. and that luxury opportunity in my career path to be on a master's and think, right, something like Machiavelli's really inspiring me now. Develop your brand, think strategic, think how you can influence and collaborate the bigger audience. I know we call it a lot the ripple effect, and really get into organizations that you don't usually talk to. My career has constantly been about, need to know, super busy, talk to the sales teams, talk to finance to make sure we're on track and delivering profit and how that measures versus your bonus, because you're a super hungry, focused sales guy. And then you talk to legal as well, just make sure you're on the right path. And certainly on the digital journey, legal super important. But that is obviously a significant part of an organization, but not the whole part. How are you learning and doing and working with HR? How are you learning and doing and working with business operations? How are you learning and doing with marketing? So I then again went on various journeys within Sony, improving my reach, getting to know different stakeholders. And they were difficult conversations, that they were also siloed. They also didn't get, why is there a need to have this fluid conversation? But I was very keen to just try. You're not going to win all these battles. You're going to have conversations internally. Some you can work with, some you can nurture, some hopefully you can accelerate a bit quicker. And again, that was a real moment of thinking to me of, the art of war, Machiavelli, think about your brand, think about mobilizing, think about collaborating, and think about how you develop the business, not just your business unit.
So I think the other challenge you had is the fact that you were doing all this within the context of a very dispersed team. I guess you had to reach out to people across all parts of the globe, very much with different cultural backgrounds. And I can see that, from some of the books that you've chosen to read, you've chosen books that also looked at, there's one here, sort of getting everyone on board, the role of inspirational leadership in geographically dispersed teams. I know that was written a while ago, but it was obviously something that was also on your mind, how to work within a very culturally and geographically diverse organization.
Yeah, and from that research, I mean, and again, I'd also add to that research the other book, Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's a lasering of what you need to do to cut through in a huge geography. Global is global, and how you create the right focus points and be very ruthless in getting that done. That's the first point. But again, in the books you refer to, it's about collaborating at the beginning. Again, lots of us start at the end and we present to global and say, this is what we've done. And there's no collaboration with the local teams. There's no collaboration with the global teams. It's you work in isolation. You're doing it for the right reasons, but ultimately you haven't got buy-in. And that's again on how I improved my toolkit, my go-to-market thought process was, let's get buy-in. And again, probably I had two elements of that. Work closely with the UK team, who I didn't know. They sat on completely different floors as I was global and they were UK. So obviously I could arrange some easy local UK teams, get some of the biggest countries on board, get their thought process and buy-in. So when the first conversation is with global on, as an acid test, well, the UK or the big markets won't like this. You can say, no, we've had some understanding and initial sound bites with certain stakeholders, and then present that to, the global teams as well at the start point and build together was clearly key. And I think stakeholder management as well, in terms of a mapping process, better preparation and planning, all of these things when you talk about it and look back are obvious. But again, when you work super fast, you get into good habits and bad habits over, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, or in my case, it was 20 years. You need to, again, intervene in how you're working, get a different reflective view and think, how can I position myself differently to global? Position myself in the shoes of what they need, what they want, what are their barriers. I could then even, Phil, talk about the another big breakthrough is obviously, and a lot of students we find on this is the third box thinking. You start positioning yourself and thinking less about you, less about Sony, less about, your brand, and more about the customer. And this just becomes a regular part of your thought process. What does the end customer want? And that customer can be external, or in this case, could be internal. And if I elaborate even more on looking at things like third box thinking, for me, Sony delivers into a distributor that then delivers into a retailer that then delivers into a consumer. And I work with these models in the masters and refined it into a fourth box thinking, which is also in my dissertation, in terms of, again, how I elevate distribution, how I grow distribution as part of a global model, which is clearly then looking at the relationship not between Sony and distribution, but between the retailer who we're not supplying to and the customer, and not losing sight that the customer will want added value. They'll want promotional activity. They'll need visibility to cut through in busy supermarkets or wherever it may be. And that is the thought process of how you go to the table, not start the conversation with a commercial conversation that puts you on the back foot already. So all of these new insights you bring to the table that, again, start to influence global stakeholders, improve your credibility, and start making, with credibility becomes traction and trust and move forward.
So just to give us a sense of the sort of scale of project, when you first embarked on this project, how much business was coming through sort of distribution and retail at the time?
Yeah, I'd say the distribution and retail came in at about 15% of the mix.
Okay.
And we were definitely everything's about timing, and certainly the beauty of the masters for me was seeing that there was a real opportunity, as I say, for a sea change within operator business and doing more with the distribution and retail business. The retail business is also another chunk. So to get this sort of double-digit growth per annum was, the opportunity was there. It's just a case of whether you grab that market share or your competitor. But the momentum was there on what the consumer wants. More consumers were starting to buy SIM-free devices. More retail outlets were becoming comfortable at selling SIM-free devices. So we were in that flux of change, which was great timing. But then we also had this other positioning that online was also coming into play, because remember, this was 2014 to 2016. And what's interesting for me on the masters is, when I think back, is, you don't just start using your new knowledge and your new intervention of skills at the end. It's not like, okay, I took the masters 2014 to 2016, right, 2017, go, and you can start doing all these good extra stuff. Actually, you're delivering and starting to improve, nurture, grow from the moment it starts. So from 2014 onwards, what Consalia and Middlesex were seeing was the same as, Sony was seeing. Steve was becoming more strategic, more relaxed, less about, getting the deals away, more internal, more collaborating. And as I said, you build your brand, you build credibility. So the respect in the organization is starting to get noticed.
That's brilliant. And by the time you left, I think the global distribution business was quite a significant part, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, the whole business for us doubled. So we were getting to about a 30% mix of the whole business.
Wow.
But I think what it did, again, in terms of the master's journey for me, literally, there were two work streams. One was delivering on the dissertation, which was great. And then the other was the work-based learning element of actually executing internally at Sony. And because of all the changes to my leadership style of taking more risk, having a vision, collaborating with teams, I also saw the opportunity that I wouldn't have seen working at 1,000,000 miles an hour and traveling everywhere and not having time to reflect, to make a play for the online business and put a business case together at the same time as doing the masters to say, I need to resource up. I was only a team of one when I was doing these global sales director roles. I mean, they're all, incredibly tiny teams working directly for the Japanese executives. You have a lot of cut through because you report to the Japanese executives, and you have a lot of workload because you're on your own. In finishing the masters, I effectively was given one other heavyweight to come in as a direct report, which was brilliant, and a show of strength to what we've done, and then an immediate promotion to then set up a new team off the back of that to include online. And as I mentioned in my intro, this is now taking Amazon EU, which was a very tiny acorn within Sony's mix, 1%, and taking that on a 10% journey in-house within the space of 12 months. So that all that risk-taking knowledge and, let's say tactful audacity of working internally with stakeholders, brought together the online business for me. And then within the space of 12 months of leaving the masters, I had a team of 5 senior direct reports running distribution, retail, online for Amazon and online for e-commerce. So it was a real great moment of everything coming together at the right time. But ultimately, I had to have the breadth of knowledge to have the maturity to be given that team. And that came from the masters for sure.
Yeah. So you've learned a lot about yourself, I'm sure, as you went on this journey. What for you were some of the key sort of learning points that you got out of everything you did?
Yeah, I mean, to say definitely the risk taking was an element for me, and risk taking, I suppose, is ultimately, you've got to make change. As I say, I could have just carried on in a global sales director role. It was a great role, but ultimately I had to take some risk. And what did risk mean? Meant I needed knowledge. Risk meant I needed intervention. And risk meant I needed to be comfortable going on a new journey. It was a real epic moment to go on a master's, and I quote the CEO of General Electric who said, "Success is all about growing yourself. When you become a leader, success is all about growing others." And that's what I'm really got a buzz out of now, is how you work within an environment and how you collaborate. As I said, I think probably again with my procurement background, I've been very tough within a sales organization. You need to have a certain level of resilience, but I was using the no word too much for my own advantage. I need to open up a little bit more. So my style needed shaping to take on the future, as it were, or take me on my crossroads in terms of my career, elevate me to the next position, give me my new hunger and passion, which, as I said, has become leadership and developing people. And now, as I say, I'm feel like I'm in a brilliant place with Consalia to give all that development on people, back. How can I share that knowledge? How can I share all those golden nuggets? And how can we see people progress within the L&D space?
So, coming back to this topic of sort of key sort of, when you start to look at leadership style in the context of the work that you did, and you were to compare the Steve Gaskell at the end of your journey compared to the beginning, what do you think people would have noticed as a consequence of the journey that you've been on? What would your stakeholders have noticed, do you think?
Yeah.
What might your direct reports have noticed?
I mean, I have been working in a very tight, well-oiled machine in terms of my team and the stakeholders I need around me to execute on sales deals, and that's what I thrived on. Now, the foot's come off the pedal in terms of that sort of silo approach, and there's a breadth of leadership to be inclusive, collaborate, ripple knowledge across the business in terms of change, take people on a journey. So I think my team absolutely got that. Steve has changed. We can see that on our performance reviews, his coaching style. He's there to, matrix are important, but people are more important, let's say. And I think, again, vision for me, naturally you talk about that in terms of leadership, and that's great, but ultimately have a vision for your business unit. I mean, I wouldn't have had that before the masters. Now I'm always thinking about what can the catch phrase be for the vision, for my brand, in terms of what we're trying to achieve. I would encourage my team to have a vision, and you just encouraging people to have some fun, get the fun and passion into their learning, into their work, because then they're going to deliver. And that's essentially what we're trying to do: unlock the talent in people.
So, you turned from, or developed from, the sort of gladiator role that you described at the very beginning. And what I'm hearing a lot is about collaboration and in all forms that it can take, I guess, and with different stakeholders. But I can also see that a lot of what you did was building the business case. Like you said, you've used certain tools like third box thinking to come up with sort of defining what might be the value proposition that you could then sell in. But it must have been, quite a big ask of Sony, to make the investments that you believe were required in order to get into the market, the global distribution market. How easy was it to sell to the Japanese?
Yeah, I mean, naturally it's difficult. I mean, any, executive team is always, very clear on detail that's required, P&L that's required. I mean, that's another maturity and growing on the masters, that you get a much better familiarization on how to position and talk about the P&L, and coming forward with clear business case, which I got the impression that, again, was my competitive edge. Let's say internally, I had more in my toolkit that I could bring to the table. I was showing P&L. And then, that's effectively the first thing I did when I came into the e-commerce business, was bring a way of P&L, rather than a brand-led website, which clearly it still is. You want your website to advertise all your, your products and your brands in an appropriate blueprint way. But ultimately, I brought in that's correct, but we need to make money. And the focus of how to produce a transparent P&L, when, behind the scenes, it's quite complicated, how all the different facets of freight or agencies and assets and delivery charges, all of this comes together, and you need to make it transparent P&L. That knowledge, to bring that to the forefront of the Japanese, and again create my credibility, was ultimately what I was able to do. And I believe, every CEO will look at their business and their direct reports. They'll all look at opportunities. They'll all look at, do we believe in these opportunities from each of the stakeholders we have? And if someone's come to the table with a clear business case, a transparent P&L, a clear vision, and clearly motivating people within the environment, not just within his business unit, but also surrounding, then this guy is capable of doing a lot more. And that's ultimately what I believe I delivered.
Yes, it sounds like it was quite a sort of an entrepreneurial mindset that you also had, in terms of being able to see an opportunity, develop that idea into a business case. And would you say that's true? That they encouraged you to think as an entrepreneur within a business?
Yeah, I think you do. I mean, I think the business relates to what speciality you're in. I was in technology. I was in mobile. It's incredibly fast moving. You have to be entrepreneurial to survive. So this type of dynamic was always there. The timing is everything, as we know. So the opportunity to then, as I say, have the time to reflect with real quality, that actually online's where it's going. No one seems to be getting this. I want to position this quickly. This can be associated to my business unit rather than be standalone, rather than going to someone else. There were other stakeholders already managing online within the Sony business. So as I say, I had to compete with them. It's a case of, which leader do you want for this business and how do you want to position it? if you're always being, proactively creative internally with how you position yourself, your team, and your organization, then naturally you're going to give yourself a good chance in the shop window to move forward. As I said, depending on what the other business priorities are or what everyone else is trying to put forward in their, budget objectives, etc.
Steve, I have to say, I do see you as a perfect embodiment of the winning mindsets that we talk about, in terms of proactive creativity and tactful audacity, client centricity with your third box thinking, and of course, authenticity. It's, the journey, the personal journey that you've been on, as you've navigated your way, not just through leadership, but also through the opportunities and the challenges you face, has been, quite an amazing story, in fact.
Yeah, it's been a significant change, and as we've witnessed, I've noticed the old Steve, let's say in 2014, as I started, and I was still in my mid 40s then. So the new Steve, in terms of being open, glass half full, can do more. I get excited when people say I can't do, or that's not possible, because I just think, yes, it can. Let's talk, let's collaborate, let's figure what needs to be doing, let's figure a business case, let's talk about the P&L, let's talk about the ingredients, let's talk about the toolkits, let's find a way that we can collaborate and get this done. Because why on earth do I want to think about the negatives? And you're not going to win every battle, that's for sure. But, life has now, the modern words, I suppose, for it has become a conversion rate. And the more you try and the more you put in, and naturally you want to work that with quality and precision, but eventually something will drop. So you just got to keep going for it. That's totally my attitude.
Well, clearly the journey that you've been on, this sort of has opened your eyes to education, reading, learning, like you said at the very beginning. And I think we're very lucky that that we have you as part of the Consalia team here, sort of helping us to navigate our way through online, developing the business, forward, albeit in a very different sort of context to the Sony Mobile one, but. It's just been sort of a great to have you with us, but not everyone sort of gets inspired by learning, and I think it's something that's been another thing that has sort of gone into the psyche of Steve, this wanting to learn more and curious about learning. So perhaps you could talk about what prompted that, or have you always been curious and a learner?
No, exactly. I mean, not at all. As I said, 2014, Steve was reading one comic book a year. 2014 onwards, Steve continues to read. I'm obviously now a reader. I've seen that work ethic and reading mentality within my parents, and how successful their careers have been off the back of that, and very humble backgrounds to very successful, people in their own right within their own industries. It's no surprising now that I'm feeling, success is coming with knowledge and sharing of knowledge. That curiosity has for sure been stimulated by the masters. The ability to learn and disperse learning for yourself and others. And again, within the Consalia world, I find it so fascinating that, I've gone from e-commerce platforms that are, WordPress, Magento, BigCommerce, and now into LMS platforms of LearnWorlds and Moodle, which are different platforms, and ultimately looking how you plug in and commercialize commerce for that, whether that's doing that with Stripe or doing that with a merchant of record, and all the digital journey that comes from landing pages, product detail pages, checkout pages, putting all of that together, how that appeals to the consumer, is great fun. It's complicated, but it's, again, it's no pain, no gain. So there's risk, there's reward. I love the mindset in Consalia is always to take some risk to make things happen. I'm learning that quite quickly from my peers in the office. And as I said, then the opportunity to make something out of the e-learning to get the ingredients that we get, the quality of work we have from what we deliver in the classroom, and how I can work with that content and make it e-learning onto our LMS platforms is fantastic. Gives you a real insight into all the courses, how we can present that in front of students, think what the students might want in terms of presentation and how they see things. And, when I'm lucky enough, I get the opportunity to go into the classroom and also give that facilitation. And that can be from level 6 degrees to postgraduate level 7s to master's level 7s in terms of my delivery. And I really find it, again, a lot of fun trying to figure what I want to deliver in that classroom, how I can hopefully deliver some golden nuggets that are relevant for some of those students, and likewise how they can give me some of their golden nuggets so we can, educate more in terms of their L&D journey. It's been super fun.
Well, that's great, Steve. Well, I think that's been fantastic to learn more about your project and also the context. It was really good to revisit your story actually after a period of time and to relive it. And I can see it's as relevant today as it was then, actually. The kind of learnings that you had, and yeah, thank you very much for taking part.
Thank you, Phil, for putting me on the podcast. And yeah, I look forward to creating more stories with Consalia.
And then one last question: When's the Deep Prof going to start? That caught you out, didn't it?
No, because I'm still finishing my coaching badge, as you know, Phil.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
But noted.
Okay. Very good. Thank you, Steve.
Okay. Thanks, Phil.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.